last episode of Influence and Impact on the whole kind of history of hot rodding, we left off in the late 40s, right after World War II, when kind of the whole industry, everything was really getting kind of more started. You know, this is when it went from the jalopies and the, land speed racing into actual hot rods. And we actually have a special guest with us, Brian Shepard, and you worked at Curry for a number of years. You currently work at Rock Jock. You are kind of a little bit of a historian on a lot of the early hot rod stuff, and especially on NHRA and drag racing. And that's kind of what we're going to key in on this episode, is kind of how the NHRA got started, how drag racing went from the streets to the track. And you got some pretty cool, memorabilia and letters and, historical stuff to really kind of show what originally happened back in the day in the early 50s and the late 40s.
Yeah, so it's been decades of my life collecting stuff, but we've got a pretty good. Marcel and I were going through it the other night. We got a pretty good enough document, hard copy documents to connect a lot of dots as far as the history of racing and the history of NHRA and the history of how everything went from kind of being disorganized in the 40s to around 1950. Everything kind of started condensing into car clubs and speed shops and catalogs and drag racing as a formal entity, and moving forward with National Hot Rod Association, that kind of thing, and how the National Hot Rod Association formed and embraced certain terminology and that kind of thing, and then moved across the country basically as starting the divisions of NHRA across the country. And so we kind of followed that path through just that documentation. And then obviously your early tracks, the Santa Ana tracks, the Pomona Drags tracks, we have all that documentation that shows how all of that came about, how that was done with the cities and local municipalities' participation and help back then. Actually were helping the hot rodders get to the next stage so they wouldn't kill themselves and get in trouble, and like, hey, let's help these guys actually do something, give them a place to go, and they'll go there.
Well, and that's what a lot of as it became more popular, there were the guys that were going out to the dry lake beds. There was a lot of the SATA timing association with that, but as more teenagers and more people started getting into it, they were just doing it on the streets. There was more, we've talked about this, more paved roads, especially Southern California. Freeways were maybe starting a little bit later, but there was a lot more stuff happening in the streets at that time that you kind of needed that outlet to go. And it's the same thing that we see today. Exactly. With whether it's a takeover or street racing or drifting, anything like that, you need some safe, legal kind of avenue to go do that. And that's what really kind of helped expand drag racing, but also hot rodding across the country was them kind of organizing all of that.
Yeah, there always has been and always going to be way more kids wanting to race than there is places for them to go.
Yeah.
Except at one point back then, it's crazy to think that, in the early 50s, the municipalities and law enforcement were way more on board with helping than it seems like they are now. I mean, they were pivotal in that actually happening and going through back then, which was really cool.
Well, and that's, because I know the first drag strip that opened up, and was this in the country or just in California, being Santa Ana?
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, let's start at the beginning. Let's try to get to where, all right, the first
because everybody's going to claim opening. That their grandpa's, daddy's, uncle had some type of, half-acre orchard that they went out there and drove their cars on. So,
I mean, even you look at Central California. I mean, that was the whole thing with American Graffiti eventually, that racing in the apple orchards and stuff like that. But so, if you want to, what's the first organized drag strip?
Okay, that's a perfect way of saying that.
Yeah,
we think it's Santa Ana Drags, right?
Yeah, as far as we know, the first properly organized, like not just guys running in every direction, like that article we were reading about the lakes, where they went to El Mirage and there's guys making passes in every direction because nobody's out there.
Well,
telling
there's
them,
not an actual.
Could you all just go that way so you don't kill each other? So Santa Ana was the first. Organized, hey, come in here, we're going to have grandstands, we're going to charge admission, but you're going to get paid. And, it's a formal racing organization at a formal permanent, semi-permanent location.
Yeah, we're more or less, hey, Saturday we're going to be doing races, show up and everything's there ready to go and ready to run, more or less.
Made posters, made stickers, made t-shirts, did payouts, the whole thing. So
right, and that made sense. It was an airport. Like most places back then, airstrips were pretty common. They were paved, so it made a lot of sense to use an airstrip. So there's your Santa Ana right there. That opened in 1950.
Yeah.
51,
Yeah.
50.
Yeah. So at that time,
this is pre NHRA
Right.
being organized. That comes a little bit later, but that was, the first one. And then I know you were kind of mentioning that you have some documentation and some stories about then when it expanded, like Pomona, when that first opened up.
Yeah, so Pomona Drags, started with the police chief. There's a whole big long story like that. We'll probably show in another episode with all the hard evidence of that. But yeah, so basically the chief of police basically spearheaded a movement with the city as far as giving these people a place to race. There's a piece of land on the county fairgrounds, and the police chief petitioned the city, petitioned the county. We just recently, just this week, found documentation where he'd actually written a letter to the FBI. There's an FBI bulletin from the 50s where he did a whole essay basically that was printed in this FBI document nationwide to here counties, cities in the country, if you're having this problem, this is how we fixed it. You can fight it all you want. It's not going to stop. You just try to embrace these people, try to help them, give them a place to go. Say, hey, if you go here, you won't get in trouble. So yeah, we have all that documentation on the Pomona Drags when that started, and that was that was kind of taking it from an airfield to more of a proper drag strip tower.
Yeah,
the
you're
tower
not borrowing
and
something else already being used.
Yeah.
In a way, it's purpose built just for drag racing.
Yeah, so Pomona Valley Timing Association was formed, so it was the PVTA drags, whatever, that kind of thing, and then that eventually became NHRA kind of moved in on that, and that became the drag strip for the Winter Nationals World Finals to this day, basically on the same strip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that's what's interesting is that having the police actually be the ones trying to push for that versus somebody like trying to just at least they had a solution for it.
Thank God. And thank God that they've had it for the last, Pomona is credited being opened in 1953. Mm-hmm. So, we're talking 70 years now, almost 75 years. So it's amazing that it's still open. And I know that there's been people talking about it closing lately, but it seems that at least the Winter Nationals and the finals, I think until 2028, we're still locked in.
What I heard, the girl that owns In-N-Out Burger took care of,
yeah, because that's now kind of like
it's In-N-Out race.
She made sure it's safe for a while.
Yeah. I'm sure she probably told the Karens of the neighborhood here's a nice place in another state for you to move to,
or here's some free In-N-Out.
Yeah, exactly. You got an In-N-Out card for life.
Yeah,
here's a gold card.
Lindsay, can I get one of those?
Well, but that's what's funny too, and I know this. We're talking about the early start stages of drag racing getting started, but I remember going to my friends that lived near the track in Pomona, and we'd go on the roof, and we were able to see the drag strip from the roof of that house. But a lot of tracks are being closed down or have been closed down in order to make room for more houses or houses being built next to tracks. So it's kind of an interesting thing that we're going through a little bit of the same stuff, like with Irwindale closing, of okay, well, where can people go to race?
That's the big question.
Other than the street.
Right.
So it's that same, whole deal. And that's, I know NHRA was kind of founded on that same principle of trying to organize people to get to racing.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because, obviously, it's pretty common knowledge that people know that Wally Parks is the founder, the father, whatever you want to call him, of the NHRA. But from most our later episodes, we talked about him being also one of the founders of the SCTA.
Mm-hmm. So he was head of the newsletter. Ran the newsletter part of that for a number of years before the war.
Right. And we also know that him and Robert Peterson and Alex Exidius all conspired together to open up Bonneville to the general public. Mm-hmm. So that was still, that's late 40s. We're talking like 48 when that happened. But like you mentioned, California was exploding with construction, so we have more paved roads. It made more sense to not have to drive an hour and a half out of Southern California to drive to a lake bed to go race in the dirt when there's this perfectly beautiful street
7-8 hours to Bonneville or something.
Yeah, right. So now we're looking at these guys are trying to also push the sport, but they had no place to push it to until they formed the NHRA. So it was kind of formed out of necessity. Mm-hmm. The thing that I'm most curious about is how much of Robert Peterson was really involved with that. Because if you look at the letterhead from the NHRA, it says Hot Rod right in the name.
Well, and it was interesting. So last episode we talked about, and we had a little bit of a quote from the SCTA newsletter that Wally Parks did not like the word hot rod. They were trying to distance themselves, say those are the teenagers causing trouble. We're not hot rodders. Right. We're not that. obviously they embraced it, they continue with it. But yeah, Brian, when you were showing us some of those early letters, the very first letter from the NHRA, the letterhead address is Hot Rod's office.
Right.
And Wally Parks was an editor
Correct.
for the magazine at that time as well. But then, a couple letters later, it says, National Hot Rod Association. Very large letters, Hot Rod in the same font. So definitely there was, whether it was funding or some of the PR help or both.
I'm sure both.
Definitely
right.
Hot Rod Magazine and Peterson, himself were involved in the foundation of the NHRA.
Right, because it was a family affair too. I mean, Barbara, Livingston at the time was Wally's fiance, and she's got her hands all over, typed letters out to people, out to correspondents, out to people saying, hey, also turn in your Hot Rod Magazine feature, along with I'm sending you something from the NHRA. So there was a little bit of double dipping going on.
Yeah.
So on NHRA letterhead in some of those letters, she's also peddling Hot Rod Magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of just all
one of the same.
All works
Yeah.
together.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Right.
it's I'm sure too is a good way for them to have events to sell the magazine, to promote the magazine,
content generation.
get
Exactly.
content, advertisers, they're out at the race, it all just kind of works together. The interesting thing that I didn't know, and probably a lot of people don't know, and a lot of racers would probably laugh at, is that the NHRA was originally a nonprofit organization.
Which there are people rolling in their graves right
I was
now.
going to say, I think Yellow Mellow would disagree that it's a nonprofit organization,
Right, right.
with whatever they spend.
Well, Wally did okay for himself. Let's just say that. Yeah, he did all right.
I don't think I think eventually it was not a nonprofit, but originally, and there was I think I was reading at least a couple hundred. We saw that from some of the early membership cards. But I read somewhere there's about 2,000 initial charter members, which is pretty big for an organization. I mean, that would be big for an organization now starting up.
Right.
So that was, but if there was nothing else, if you had individual timing associations that were very regional or even just, based on one lake bed or one track, but then now you have, even though it wasn't necessarily at the very beginning, you have a national association to promote drag racing.
No, it's funny you say that because there was more competition than you would think. You would think at the time, and especially too looking at NHRA right now, you would think, that would be the only game in town, but really they had a lot of competition at the time. The American Timing Association, that was another.
Okay, so that was more national.
Right. I mean, the AHRA came later, but there were other.
ATA, out of the Midwest, they were kind of head-to-head. They had their first nationals in 1955, same year, so they were.
Yeah, that NHRA then went to.
Yeah, they were recognizing them as a competitor for sure. But I think that's part of what probably catapulted the NHRA is the Hot Rod Magazine coverage would push out that agenda probably. And but then you say competition. You were still also in competition with lakes racing, with midget racing, with other forms of the hobby, and you're trying to draw the hot rods in as they're coming off the lakes, as they're coming off the midget tracks, wanting to do hot rods, wanting to be on the street. That's where you're kind of pulling all those guys in.
Now trying to get them to go to the track and stuff like that. I am kind of curious. I don't know if you guys would know, I maybe doubt it, but was there any pushback from some of the hot rod guys or the race guys that didn't want to go onto an asphalt track or something like that?
I'm sure there was. I'm sure guys
with anything they're always using.
That's the natural progression of the sport. So I'm sure there's people that are probably they probably had a really good deal in the dirt and they went to the asphalt and it's a totally different animal. So
and that's true too. Yeah, there might not, the experience level of racing on each might not.
But at that time too, equipment was pretty across the board.
Mm-hmm.
People had to develop things to go fast on the asphalt. I mean, we'll flat out even say tires.
Yeah, I was going to say tires would be a big
that's something we can get into the Inglewood tire thing later on. But I mean, that's literally they had to invent cheater slicks to catch traction on the asphalt, right? Whereas a cheater slick in the dirt would just be a stone wheel basically. So there were things, I think, little cheats that got people into looking at asphalt and going faster. And also the other thing too, they just went faster. They were timing everything all the time. So, a 13-second car in the dirt is an 11-second car on the street. So
you got more clout if you go in 11.
It's true, right? You get more chicks. No, I'm kidding.
And even my dad has a vintage circle track car, and it's a pavement circle track car, but it has Inglewood slicks on it. So, I mean, there was all that crossover, where, hey, there's...
Well, and I think that's just a lot of it too, is just everyone was racing everything they could and trying everything. And then it kind of just eventually narrows itself down and kind of goes with, one kind of thing. And then drag racing became, I mean, obviously we still have all the other forms of racing, but drag racing, your NASCARs, which was a little about at the same time as well.
Yeah. I mean,
more or less.
Right. But also too, I mean, if you look at the evolution of drag racing, where you're talking about guys that were on lake beds and doing things in roadsters and coupes. Now all of a sudden those roadsters and coupes are going they're on the pavement going faster, but they also learned, hey, extending things, changing wheelbases, moving things around, made it go faster. That's all seeking speed.
Well, and that's too something that you can way better accomplish that on a standard drag strip that is 20 minutes from your shop.
Right.
And also is going to be consistent every single week and every single day. You have to deal with weather or different conditions. And you can dial it in a lot more. Here's
the other thing we're forgetting about. Yes, people drove out to the lake beds in the early days. But again, too, you try to get girls out into a dusty area, just spectators. Spectators aren't going to go out there for very long. So having grandstands, having parking, having bathrooms, that kind of stuff. That's something food. Now you can go to the races all day long, and your girlfriend's not going to complain. That type of thing. So I think that played a big role in it too. Is that you could invite your even your friends out, your family to come see you race, and it it's just kind of like a badge of honor.
And just myself being whatever level of historian I am, just researching and having the documentation, but also talking to a lot of people. Stuff like the Santa Ana Drags, it's so common to talk to somebody that was there or read somebody's story where they went every single week.
Yeah,
that was my life. I went every single week.
And
it wasn't like go to Bonneville twice a year.
I was going to say if some of the other,
I'm there every week.
Yeah, you had a regular set out schedule, and that was much more often than.
And I think that was a tradition that carried a long time, because even when I grew up in the 80s, Ascot was still open, and I would go to Ascot every Friday night. Whether or not either I drove or I was even young enough not to drive, that I would get a ride to Ascot every Friday night, because there was always racing going on.
And it's the same with Lions Dragstrip opened in 1955. I mean, the old guys that I talked to that went there, and my dad, I mean, they would go almost every week. They would race 3-4, a couple nights a week, different nights for different purposes. But yeah, it was almost once a week. Those guys were at Lions Dragstrip. It's just what you did, because it was centrally located. It wasn't out in the middle of the desert. It was right here in town. You can go. You can have
it was an easy thing to do, and you're out for a couple hours versus a whole weekend or something.
So this is something too that I noticed, that researching early tracks, the involvement of different clubs, I guess you should call that. You mentioned Lions Dragstrip. So Lions is an actual participant club for, I guess, I don't know. How would we even say that? I mean, it's like the Kiwanis Club or the...
Well, that's a lot of the early SETA stuff. I remember the clubs are what was basically the membership, where it wasn't, maybe you had individual members, but it was like, this club ran that timing association.
Sure.
That club ran that. It's the same as what we see with shows and stuff.
This was different. I mean, the Kiwanis had, for example, Kiwanis, they have nothing to do with automotive.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? And
Lions, not a car club.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Lions is the same thing. Lions is like a Shrine, the Shriners. The Rotary, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so
I have relatives that are Lions.
There you go. Okay. Yeah. So that's what's funny about it is that I guess, community clubs, if you're going to call it that, for a better lack of term, that is kind of what helped get these racetracks. So, hey, Kiwanis Club, where are you at now? Let's go. I mean, right?
I mean, I'd totally go to a racetrack that had Shriners in those little cars racing around them. I mean, I would 100% do that.
That's the entertainment. That's
the mid halftime show. There you go.
Well, okay, you guys, and all the old, and I'm sure Brian, you know the same thing. All the old stories that you hear about Lions is that yes, it was drag racing, but it was spectacle. Like they would have guys that would go out there and entertain the crowd, like to get things going. They would have, strange races. They would have like a guy racing a horse. Or always had foot races. That's even something out in the parking lot. But they made Lions fun. It wasn't just all business. It was an entertainment deal.
Yeah, so that's something we'll invite. The family will have a good time going out there. Same as going to Monster Jam or something like that, where it's just just the race part, but it's entertainment.
It was just Monster Jam 4 nights a week. That's all it was. Yeah. Right. I mean, and that's the other thing too. I mean, most of these tracks, like Lions, for example, it was open Thursday, Friday, Saturday. and they'd race on Sunday, but it wasn't open Sunday night. So you'd have 4 solid days every week of money racing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some guys that I grew up with that their parents actually made money racing at Lions. Like that was their profession. You know, I still like in my head go like, how?
Well, yeah, because isn't the joke about how do you build $1 million race team, start out with 5 million?
Yeah, right,
So,
right.
yeah.
And these guys, but I mean, I've grew up with stories where guys would say like, you know, I had an old, you know, DeSoto Hemi and this digger, and I blew the thing up. So I would just go to the wrecking yard down the street from Lions and buy another one and throw the same motor, no rebuild, just flat out. Like, you know, we joke around about LS swaps, right? So
all I had to do was go down the track once or
right,
twice.
and that was the other thing too. They would just drive it till it broke, and rinse and repeat, right? Like just drive down Alameda and get another one. So, but Lions, I think too, is people always talk about Lions. I mean, Mickey Thompson was obviously pivotal in starting that and running it. But Lions, I think, was the Southern California track that truly was where a lot of people went to, even more so kind of than Pomona in some senses.
And back in that day,
right?
Absolutely, Lions is way more popular. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then Lions didn't last. Or
1972.
no, Santa Ana ended 1959.
Right.
Yeah, but then Lions was fairly close by to Santa Ana, right?
This is Long Beach.
Oh, Long Beach. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right at the 405 there.
yeah. So that's kind of bringing us into like getting like you were saying, like those Southern California drag strips, but then we started seeing some pop up throughout the country as well.
So yeah, that was, you know, Wally's big idea was expansion.
Yeah.
So he reached out to fellow people throughout the United States looking for people to be, I guess, charter members.
Yeah, you're saying. Well, no, you had to. Was it the districts?
Divisions.
Divisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had divisions of NHRA that were basically like your regions.
Yeah, so they were trying to start that, and I was showing you some documentation on that, where they were sending out letters. They were getting car clubs to come and have a meeting. So, hey, in Ohio, find the guy who's the guy in that area, and hey, have him corral all the car club guys and get them all together, and we'll have a meeting and tell them what's going on and try to get them involved in NHRA as far as being that division in that part of the country, and have them send representatives, that kind of thing, and to widespread the NHRA, which is brilliant, you know.
Yeah, because that's like we were saying, that goes beyond just the local timing association. It's really makes it the national organization, and that was happening fairly quickly. Because I think some of the ones letters you're showing me, like the Lynn Weiland and stuff, were 51, 52. So it was like the same. It was all within that same year or two getting started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and he acted quickly, and I think again it goes back to having involvement with Hot Rod, because you know, like you mentioned, Lynn Wineland there.
Yeah.
And he actually was a car club president. He had a club called the Hood Lifters.
Well, we found out that he was the founder of the Hood Lifters, but he
Wasn't the president.
Someone else was the president, but he was the guy that started the club.
Yeah. But I mean, he was a hot rodder guy, you know, and he was a show car, you know, somewhat. But at the time too, like show car and strip was kind of one and the same. Like the race car guys did influence some of the show car guys too as well.
Yeah.
So,
but that's like we'll get into it a little bit later when we start talking more about the show rods and the street stuff. But that a lot of those shows started popping up at the same time that the NHRA was. So it's kind of like, okay, this is so big now. We got to start like categorizing where, okay, you want to go fast, go with the NHRA. You want to look cool and go with this, you're going to do the custom stuff. So we'll get into that, you know, on the next episode. But
yeah, but Lynn actually he
kind of crossed a little bit. He
crossed
both
over
worlds,
because Wally was actually reached out to him the first time to feature his car. And what's really funny is a letter to Barbara. It basically says like, enclose your photos of your magazine article that we plan on running in a future episode of Hot Rod, or a future issue. I'm sorry, but he was the guy that he reached out to because he knew that he was the mover and shaker for that area. So Wally's like, hey, let's
some
get
guy
this
in
started.
Ohio. That's the guy to talk to.
Yeah.
That guy's putting on his own runs. He's building cars. He's involved in. He has his own club. He's involved. Yeah. So that was a natural guy to gravitate towards to try to spread the.
Yeah, might as well pick the guy that kind of already has people organized in some fashion rather than trying to go in there.
And as it grew too, what was really good about it is as it grew and as they added people to it, those people would talk too. So the guy that like, hey, I'm a track up here. I'm US 30 up here in, you know, Illinois. And here I am, you know, what are you guys doing in California, or vice versa? Right. So they kind of helped each other out and wrote letters and corresponded back and forth to each other. So it was the forming of that organization, I think, that was also the glue that kept it together.
if you still got the factory speakers in your truck, what are you doing? You need to get over to powerbaseusa.com. So if you use the code AUTOREV at powerbaseusa.com, you can get 10% off anything on the site. And even some of their portable audio systems like this little boombox here, the BT500. So Powerbase came out with this really cool under-the-seat subwoofer enclosure, and it's already amplified, it's under 3 inches tall, and it's about the size of a piece of paper. So it's perfect to put in a newer vehicle, a leased truck where you can't make any modifications. It's a simple setup to add a little extra bass to your system. And if you use the code AUTOREV at powerbaseusa.com right now, you can get 10% off on it. So go check it out. So if you've been following us on Auto Revolution and checked out some of our OBS Clash build series or even the documentary we did a few years ago, you know we do a lot of stuff with Beltec suspension. What's really cool is they partner with us to give you guys free shipping on every order that you use the code AUTOREVOLUTION at beltec.com. Once again, you can get free shipping on everything from OBS lowering kits to Jeep and brand new lift kits. Sway bars, shocks, you name it, you can get it at beltec.com. Use the code AUTOREVOLUTION at beltec.com to get free shipping. Now back to the show.
So part of my collection of history, I've got all the original rule sets back to literally the number one set of rules ever produced by the NHRA that were found in Wally's house after he passed away. I have the original set of Santa Ana Drags rules, that kind of thing. But those evolved into, the rule book, which they still put out rule books, physical rule books now. But
the full official, that's probably... how was it just like a 1 page?
Actually, the first
set.
set.
What was the first?
It's like 4 pages, the first set. Yeah. On a big, tall, funny sized sheet of paper. Yeah.
Yeah. Like single space typed.
Yeah.
Like it's, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, they started putting out the formal rule books, but the first one that ever came out, it's like this big little books.
Well, yeah, little pocket books. Yeah. Well, so you could maybe you go, okay, I'm good.
So in there's a lot of cool information, and then the forward section of that explains, hey, we had a meeting on this date, blah blah blah, in 1951, and that's when the NHRA was formed, and then it goes into all the rules. But then they started putting out. We had the full collection of a book they put out called Operation Dragstrip, also, and what that was that. Hey, okay, so we've spread across the country, we've spread the word. There's little tracks here and there, like Marcel said, somebody's got a little out in the back thing, blah, blah, blah. You want to become a track.
Yeah, you want to register yourself.
Yeah, if you want to be recognized by the NHRA, if you want any, love in Hot Rod Magazine, any of that kind of thing, you've got to be a certified strip that's safe, that's running on the timing equipment we're running on, that's all of these things. So
you're conforming to the rules and regulations that all basically standardize most tracks. Yeah.
So completely outboard of the rule book for the race cars was an entirely separate book that was put out by NHRA to...
Oh, just for the tracks themselves.
And it's called Operation Dragstrip, basically. So they would send that to basically anybody that, hey, if you have this property and you want to bring yourself up to these standards, that's all you got to do. Here's the book, But so that was how a lot of tracks, all over the country said, okay, well, hey, I want to do this. I want to be recognized by the NHRA. I want to be, sanctioned by the NHRA. I want to use NHRA rules because, again, this all went back to the municipalities and that kind of thing, looking at them like, oh, hey, no, we're to code here. Because it's like the code.
More like, it is you're up to your track is up to code, basically.
Well, but it helped people, too, get insurance because now there's a sanctioning body saying that this is safe. So now that track owner can go after his insurance and say, hey, I'm within these rules and regulations. So it helped the tracks grow.
On board and organized and stuff like that.
Right.
And what were some of the big tracks that started up kind of following some of the ones we just mentioned in Southern California?
Well, in Southern California?
Well, no, I was saying beyond Southern California.
Okay.
So like maybe that would have come, because of this, the NHRA forming and the sanctioning body and being involved. Why were they...
Great Bend, I think, is one that we need to mention because Great Bend
was in Kansas. Yeah, that was like the first.
Well, Great Bend's still operational, so it's one of the oldest tracks that's open. A lot of people say it's one of the first tracks open. Again, it goes back to that who's got this land.
What's a track?
But I think isn't Great Bend the first place that they held the nationals at?
Yeah, outside of California was the first.
1955. Yeah, the official first NHRA national sanctioned drag race was there in 1955, and then that's that was the one that their first event got rained out and had to do their finals in Arizona.
Wait, so
Yeah.
the Winter National? Oh, well, it wasn't Winter Nationals, but so you're saying the Winter Nationals got rained out?
Yeah. Boy, that's never happened.
I was just say the joke in Southern California is the rainy Nationals because
Yep.
it usually always rains around the time.
That's our winter week.
Yeah, pretty much. That's our week of rain in Southern California is when the Winter Nationals happen. So
Yeah. So at that point, that was what evolved over time into the U.S. Nationals at Indianapolis. But that was the first Nationals, they called it.
Yeah.
Was to bring all the national people that they'd gathered into NHRA in those past years.
And I mean, obviously Indy is as well, but Kansas is a fairly central,
Right.
location. So if you're trying to get people to come in, it's harder to get someone from the East Coast to California at that time. So
Right. I would think.
Michigan, I had the two best photos on. That was
Was that US 30, right? I said earlier that it was in Illinois, but it's not.
it was 2 US cities. There's one in Indiana and there's one.
That's
so
why I'm getting after that.
Yeah, so there's US 30 Dragway in Gary, Indiana.
Yeah, it's in Gary. Yeah.
But then you also have the Great Lakes Dragway
That's one,
in
Great Lakes.
Okay.
That's
in
one I had the two
Wisconsin.
photos of.
There you go. Okay.
And that's in Wisconsin.
So,
Wisconsin,
Great
yeah.
Lakes. I've got all the track photographer photos from Great Lakes from the 50s. It's really a time capsule of what. But again, it was a big sanctioned track for that time frame. You can tell it was no joke. It was a real deal. So.
And of course, too, I mean, they were also nationwide. I mean, there's Orange Dragway that was in New Jersey. Yeah. That's another kind of for that area. Because again, too, I mean, think of the regions of the country. We're thinking that drag racing was only in Southern California, but it expanded like wildfire. And
that's it. It helped then obviously become recognized. And maybe they were some of these mom and pop, local drag strips. But then, you start getting people from the NHRA to, put their stamp of approval and invite people to come out to it. Then, it's going to keep expanding and growing in that area.
right.
And they started putting out books then. I think the earliest one I have is like 61. That was then the list per division of those tracks.
Oh, okay.
So they're the sanctioned track books of
Right.
here's 1961. These are all the NHRA sanctioned tracks where you can go race.
Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense though too, because they had such a big expansion during that time.
And that's and so 61 was the year that the first Indy race or the first national Indy race, right?
At Indianapolis.
At Indianapolis. Yeah.
So
They still called it just the Nationals, but it was
Right.
Yeah.
Indianapolis.
I think it actually turned into the U.S. Nationals when it went to Indy, because it was just the Nationals when it was in Kansas before. But anyways, I mean and that also could just be who printed that at the time. There's a lot of
Well, it's or it's finally like the baseball World Series that is only U.S. and Canada. So
it's
like,
the World Series.
It's just what do you want to call it?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just-
The World Series of Drag
Name
Racing
it
in the Midwest of America in
Yes.
1955.
Right.
there you go.
No, exactly. But now, isn't that funny? You have some firsthand information of that. Now, didn't Frank Curry actually go to that race?
Yeah, Frank Curry told me the story of going. Well, they wanted to go to the first national drags, but they were in Southern California, and in 1955 they were driving Model A's and that kind of thing, so they couldn't justify going to the Midwest. They had no good way to get there. But when it rained out and went to Arizona, he told us the story of well, you guys were there, yeah. When he told us that story of 4 guys in a Model A Roadster driving from Southern California to Arizona to that event. But back then that's what they had. That was their car.
That was what they had, and it wasn't like you were going on an 80-mile-an-hour freeway on the 10.
Yeah,
or
because
something.
the 10 didn't exist. Yeah,
you were.
You're on a 2-lane
That was
road.
just a normal.
Yeah.
But it probably took a lot longer than 5 or 6 hours.
But that in itself is a cool story, just joking. They were that determined. But I mean, but it just shows interest. I mean, those guys raced at Santa Ana, and here's the national drags. I mean, literally the national drags. That was so big back then that they were determined. 4 guys are going to ride in a Model A with a rumble seat to Arizona because we're going to see this thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
Did they? And they didn't race there. That was just
They just
Frank was just going to spectate and stuff.
Yeah. But now the good thing that happened out of Santa Ana Drags was, I mean, after it closed, obviously Wally saw the genius in CJ Hart, so he became an actual employee of the NHRA until he retired, right?
Well, so he went from Santa Ana when that closed to Lyons.
Okay. Yeah.
And when Lyons closed, he went to Orange County Raceway.
Right.
And then when Orange County Raceway closed, then he went to the NHRA and drove the truck that towed the jet dryer thing until he retired.
And he was a cool guy. Yeah. He had tons of stories, lots of good stuff. I mean, and he was really open to a lot of people, because I mean, I can remember him talking to a bunch of different people. So, yeah, it was really cool.
He was a man of the people.
He was a man of the people. Yes.
Well, and that's what we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but Wally Parks was maybe not necessarily as much of a
people didn't really
man
like
of the
Wally.
people,
Yeah.
but definitely got things done and got things organized. And
I think Wally's deal was someone's got to be the boss, right? Because there's more I can't stand that guy stories than there are he was the greatest guy in the world. But I think someone's got to say no.
And then many of the letterhead letters we have here, it's a lot of the message is kind of the whole you're either with us or against us kind of thing. If you guys want to have a hot rod club, if you want to have a national club, you guys have to send in your dues. You have to participate, or this thing's not going to go like we all want it to go, and you guys have to be on board, or it's not
kind of like it's a little bit of peer pressure and nudging with a the arms around the shoulder, but it's also like starting to grip.
Right. If this doesn't take off, it's your fault because you didn't send us your $2 dues.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's it was really interesting. It's $2 per member per year.
Yeah.
I don't know what that accounts for now and what
$65.
Let's say it's the same as a Costco membership or something.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So but it's kind of interesting when we talk about it, originally a nonprofit, but probably because they weren't making any money the first few years because they were having to organize all of this and promote all of it and get and travel and maybe I'm wondering, do you know if the NHRA was involved? I mean, I know you said of like the track ownership kind of manual, if you will, to like this is what your track needs to be. Did the NHRA themselves own any tracks or like partner with any of them, or was it just like more like a stamp of yes, this is NHRA sanctioned and we can hold races there?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, because like the Pomona Drags is always owned by LA County Fairgrounds, what have you, and they never owned it. They basically assisted because like you said, National Hot Rod Association, when you break that down, wasn't necessarily originally like a drag racing organization. It was they're offering dues. You can pay dues to become part of this hot rod association. So you're associated with other hot rodders and yes,
it just they kind of found their home at drag strips and race that.
We sanctioned drag races.
I think the closest answer to what you're saying is that Robert Peterson was on the board of directors for Riverside International Raceway out in clearly in Riverside, and that was a sports car track. Like they had the LA Times race there, and it was known as, again, a sports car. Not even at the time was even known as a NASCAR track, which it later became. They would use the back straightaway as the drag strip, and they started that in I think '57 is when that came out, or when they decided. Now again, too, Robert Peterson being on the board and being on the board of NHRA and the Hot Rod magazine, you can connect the dots on how that was like. Well, we need another track, and it should be one that we can take all of the gate. So. Yeah, I think they probably every opportunity they could to make money. I'm sure that they
got involved.
Right, but you're right. I can't think of a track even today that's owned by the NHRA. Like that's something that like what you're bringing up. I'm thinking to myself, going like, I don't think they own any tracks. I think it's just always been the sanctioning body.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty smart.
And that's and probably too. That's also I mean, that would keep from any maybe conflict of interest kind of things of like, oh, everyone runs faster at our track.
Yeah.
Or, how it always is.
But the thing, you encourage people with the Operation Dragstrip to bring their track up to standards, and then you go, you give them the love if they do. If they pull their weight,
helps
then you're
everybody. It helps them because then they can put
helps a lot that local community and what have you, and so when they're not running a sanctioned NHRA event, the local guys can come there and run, but they've got a NHRA quality track there. Then at that point,
what we're I mean, I know obviously we've seen tons of the roadsters and the coupes and like stuff. But what were most of the guys running on a drag strip back in the 50s, early 60s versus what we were seeing at the lake beds?
Well, Marcel and we just went through an album. I have a whole album of the track photographer from the Pomona drag strip, from Pomona Valley Timing Association. He was the photographer on site. And a lot of it was just kind of stock appearing cars, but they had a place to race. It's guys that would otherwise have been on the street doing something stupid. Here's just a regular looking car. There's a lot of cars that were dual purpose lakes cars. So like the original SoCal Coupe that was you think of as a lakes car, radical chop. The windows are only this high on the side. Yeah. There's pictures of it on the drag strip at the Pomona Drags, and then you've got a lot of the street roadster kind of thing, the roadster pickups, that kind of thing. But then there's a lot of these you could tell were just
like a 1940 coupe, business coupe,
right.
But then there was a lot
regular
of
car. Yeah.
there's a lot of them with those fabulous formed bodies I showed you with Ardens in them, and there's these, you've probably heard of the car called the Glass Slipper. That was one of the real early cars. But there's a lot of those cars with those. They were almost a crossover of like a dirt car kind of thing, almost the body panels, but you could tell they were much longer. But they had bodies all up over the engines, that kind of thing. So those were obviously the money
kind
guy,
of more purpose built.
The big money guy
stuff.
Racers. Yeah, this wasn't just somebody's sedan, out there running.
Yeah.
So.
I think that decade is the run what you brung decade, where they were still figuring it out. I mean, really, Art Chrisman's kind of the first guy that built a slingshot. Well, it wasn't even called a slingshot back then. I mean, if you look at the Chisler, it was a chain-driven drag car. That's right, like a motorcycle chain with a big sprocket, right? And that was, and they were trying things, and that.
The Dick Craft, the Bug.
That's right. The Dick Craft, the Bug was, and the Bug is just basically it's a car that they stripped down to absolutely nothing. I mean, like bobbed, rear axle, all that other stuff. So
kind of what they considered the car that coined the term the rail dragster.
Exactly, exactly. So I mean, we didn't have those slingshot or the rail dragsters that we think of from the 60s.
Doesn't say your quintessential dragster.
This was literally Model A frame rails, and it was a rail with an engine on it and a seat. So
right, right. And we're still behind the engine at this time. We're still not out in front yet. That doesn't happen until the 70s.
Yeah,
but that's the other thing too. That I mean, at the time, if you think about it, all cars kind of had a front engine car. So why would you make a rear engine car? That would just be silly.
Well, and it's as they started even going even faster, they probably figured out, okay, well, the weight and the traction, like we need to do things differently in order to keep getting faster and
And that's
improving.
when those guys are getting their footings.
Yeah.
They're learning about that kind of stuff. Because again, too, it went from dirt to asphalt, and that's a humongous jump.
They're trying tires, they're trying gears, they're trying engine combinations, they're trying weight changes, all that. I remember Frank Curry telling me stories about he built a drag car for a guy for Santa Ana. The guy brought him a four-door Willys sedan, like a 37 Willys four-door sedan. And these were all guys that, came out of the war or whatever, and brought him some kind of a 12 or 16 cylinder tank engine. I said, hey, can you put this in that? He's like,
right.
Yeah, leave it here. We'll figure it out. So, then it had pipes out the side of the hood and pipes out the front door, for this engine, this big long engine that was in there. And they took it to Santa Ana drags. But again, it was just guys thinking that, nope, this is it. This is the next big idea that's going to kill it. But back then there was no pre-existing information.
Everything was new,
was on
so
the
might
table.
as well go for it.
Everything's on the table. And then, a lot of those guys, you'd see them, 1 week they got, this engine and this engine coupled together, and then they replace this engine with something else, and they're just trying a body here, trying this, that, and a lot of the guys I've talked to, guys that built car I'm working on, talked about how they would change the engine location in the car sometimes twice a week, like cut the motor mounts and transmission mounts out of the car, move it front, back, move it up, down, change angle, whatever it was, because didn't work last week. Let's try something else. And then, hey, we go on a Wednesday night.
See if this works or not.
Yeah. Go on a Wednesday night grudge match race, and I didn't work either. Let's fix that for Saturday and try it again. And,
because we got to win the money race. Right.
So they do it twice a week. But there was just no pre-existing information for any of this back then. So it was ever just like ourselves. It was just kind of the Wild West of all. There was no technology. There was no recorded information. Everybody was still figuring it out.
And the only information that really got around was, and this kind of comes from the SCTA, is that Wally was really good about newsletters. Mm-hmm. So... Okay, here's a funny thing. We just mentioned that the NHRA stands for the National Hot Rod Association.
Yeah.
But their very first newsletter, which was still titled NHRA, stood for News of Hot Rod Activities. Okay, I mean it's in the name, right?
And that
it's a great name for a newsletter.
Because who knows if that was purposefully done like that to try to keep promoting the NHRA name,
right?
But then you draw some confusion maybe of, is NHRA association or is it a
newsletter
or both?
Is it Hot Rod Magazine or is it right?
Yeah.
And there's only one of those known to exist, so maybe they thought that was a bad idea afterwards.
Right.
Somebody in marketing said, "Hey, this is not the way to do this."
Yeah. You're confusing people of what NHRA stands for or something basically.
But they went on to start another newsletter. What was that?
Yeah, so they started their formal newsletter in 1955 called the Drag Link, which came out in 1955 in a formal newsletter format, with a header and, newspaper style columns, and it was 4 pages, and there's on the back, you could buy stickers and whatever and that kind of thing. And the first 3 issues were called the Drag Link, and then with issue number 4, they changed the name to Tie Rod for nobody knows why, and then that ran
because he was a front end, Drag Link.
That's what I was going to say.
Tie Rod was a guy working at a front end shop.
Drag Link seemed like a perfect name for that.
Yeah, right.
I mean, so this is one thing I don't think we even looked at. I don't think I looked up. Was the term drag racing?
Yeah, you're right. Where'd that come from?
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. But okay, so
the tie rod became the newsletter at issue number 4. That went through 1960, and during the 1960 season of racing and this 1960 season of the newsletter is when they introduced National Dragster. So then from that, tie rod suddenly stopped, and next month you got National Dragster, and then the rest is history. National Dragster, that's what's still their current publication.
Right.
But that was the early publications, and they're actually very good, very well done. A lot of very good national coverage, good photography. It was a very well put together newsletter for that time in history.
Well, think about it. I mean, Wally's already putting out a magazine every month, so he should be pretty good at a newsletter, I'd hope.
Yeah. Publishing a newsletter shouldn't be a big deal.
Right. And I mean, obviously, it was all a lot of information that was being also given by his divisional
director reports
exactly.
and what have you, to get them their credit where they were at, and because you got to think there's minimal TV back then. There was no internet. How do you get your information back then? You had to get if you wanted your track, your division to grow, you better get your information in for the newsletter.
Exactly.
So that, you got credit for your great event, your fast times, and hey, we're the fastest time in the country right now out here and wherever in the country you are. And
and that was super important too. I mean, the guys that came to California, because everybody always thought of Southern California as the the Mecca, the holy land of this stuff. So yeah, the guys that are the fastest guy from Indiana or from wherever, he's going to come out here and show us California boys how it's done, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So gotta love the internet. Gives you two different definitions. So
is one of them RuPaul's?
Don't read the other one.
Yes, that is in here. That is in here.
Oh, great.
As RuPaul naming it as tended to be a sarcastic kind of joke, but
hey, and we're the ones
Encyclopedia
that are in trouble.
Britannica saying it gives you the perfect spelling bee. Use this in a sentence.
Yes,
because it says drag racing originated in which two contestants race from a standing start side by side on a drag strip.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of information.
Thanks.
Yeah. This we
You
know.
mean drag racing happens on a drag strip, and that's
you don't say.
And this is Jalopnik, so this is obviously a lot more,
Car
dialed
related.
in on car related. Is generally the thing it just came from even pre-cars with horses racing each other, where they would drag a sled behind them with the guy.
Makes sense.
So
makes sense.
That's the drag racing that then just
that.
transferred over into cars.
Yep. Okay.
But
because like we said earlier, as long throughout time, if there was two thing that could race each other, they're out doing it.
there's always
There
some
is.
level of competition happening.
I
so
mean,
it's-
the Brotherhood Raceway at Terminal Island during the 90s, that will tell you right there that they will race anything. We'll get into that one.
I was going to
though.
say, do we want to know
Yeah.
what? 'Cause
Oh, boy. There's some stuff that
was this Terminal Island when it was a raceway or when it was the prison still? Or there's
kind of one of the same,
prison now.
Yeah. Again, right?
Yeah.
But even back, to the Roman Coliseum. I mean, there's racing.
No, that's
racing back as
chariot
far-
races and stuff like that.
People are
which-
going to race, so that makes sense about the drag.
Well, and
races.
that's what
You
was
guys know.
interesting too when we were looking up the Rosetta Timing Association. The Rosetta is the name for a red chariot.
Yeah.
From the Ben-Hur movie.
Oh, no kidding.
That's how they kind of got that naming for it and stuff like that. So it's just it's the modern version of kind of what has always been happening, and now we've got people in jet powered.
Hey, guys, I
cars.
grew up in the South Bay, which is kind of the holy land of drag racing, whatever. And there's a bar called Brennan's on Lincoln Boulevard that they race turtles.
I've been there. Turtle races.
Yep, turtle races. And that is a known thing since the 60s. So people know, they'll race anything.
Yeah.
So it's a good Irish bar, too. You've been there, yeah.
I've been there,
Good
and that's
times,
what
good
I mean,
times.
it was at least 10, 15 years ago when I was there, and
It's still
popping.
strong. Yeah, it's still strong.
It was
Yeah.
a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of bets go down in that place, So, anyways, okay, back on track here. We're back, we're racing in the 50s.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too. A lot of the stuff, speed parts. Yes, companies like Edelbrock, Iski, Offenhauser, all those guys, they were around, but most of that stuff came from midget racing because those were the race cars of the day. Mm-hmm. So.
And that's where there were more until the drag strips really got established. That's
Right.
where you had your tracks, more or less, that people were
Well,
going to and
it was
attending.
spectator
That's where the
friendly and-
spectators
Yep.
were going. So you had your market that you could
but
promote to.
And unfortunately, I mean, obviously, you go to a stadium, you watch midget races. Those are race cars. You're not going to drive the alcohol-driven Offenhauser, home. So those guys obviously got interested in street racing or just having a nice car, or at least even saying, hey, I want to do that on the street.
Yeah, I was going to say,
evolution takes over.
You can guarantee that there's a handful of people that would leave that, the midget races and hop in their car and their buddy down the street and go, let's try,
mine's faster than yours. Right. Yeah. So, I mean,
naturally going to happen.
So that's kind of where the speed parts came from. That's where like those manufacturers, and the manufacturers knew that they had to get their news out there. And again, there's no internet. The newspaper doesn't care about them. So catalogs.
Well, the newspaper cared about them, but usually it was always
around.
like,
yes.
Well, yeah, like I have, like a news article of like Harry Westgard got fined $15 for speeding, and that was in the newspaper.
Oh, Harry.
Slow
it down.
But no, so I mean, but the newspapers cared more about the
hooligans.
hooligans and the teenage
nothing's changed
people doing stuff.
Yeah,
but like Marcel said, the lakes racing back to the 30s and the midget racing went back to the 30s. That was basically the inception of speed parts. Your early companies, your Hildebrands and the Thixtons and the Eddie
that's
Meyer
what they got their start in.
That's where they started. And so most of the all of that, those brands are still, relatively well known, but that's what evolved into, bigger brands as other styles of hot rodding and racing came about. Then all those companies could expand outboard of something that was just contained on a midget track. Like,
and that's
hot rodders want to drive these things every day, and they'll buy the same stuff.
Yeah, if you've got your car that you drove to the track to go watch those, if you could put something on it that would make you go faster, then that's where, the market's going to go versus just sticking to strictly race cars. And I think too, like I remember reading that the kind of people were getting kind of, and maybe it's not necessarily burnt out on midget racing, or there was a lot of midget racing, but it's just, oh no, this is the new cool thing to do is let's go drag racing, or let's see,
I think they just
race our hot rods.
With midgets, they just saturated the market as far as Southern California. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was at a time where you could drive, and I mean, again, West LA and South Bay area, there was 4 different stadiums in like a 3 to 4 mile area. So which stadium you're going to race tonight? Because there was 2 Ascots.
Yeah.
There's Gilmore. There's Culver City, which Gilmore and Culver City are about, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile away from each other. So how are you going to be with different stadiums? How are you going to pull people from here and there? So they just
too much, and it wasn't. Yeah. So
right.
then just kind of dilutes it all down.
Right.
And we had a bunch of early Culver City and like Gilmore programs. We just randomly pulled one out there the night to look at, and it was from the early 50s, and it was the first night. It said, this is #1 event where we're gonna have the midget races, but we're also gonna have hot rod races. And there's pictures in there of guys with their street like track T things off the highway that they drove as hot rods, or probably Lakes cars also. Yeah. They let them run on the track, so they were seeing.
But that was kind of more as exhibition. Kind of
that was a class.
They actually did class. It as an actual race.
Yeah. So, but I mean,
they recognized it.
Obviously, they were seeing. They must have been seeing some kind of a hurt on their attendance and their money if they said, okay, our sacred bowl here for these high end little midgets, we're going to let these guys bring these $100 hot rods in here, run them, but that's what the everyman could do. I mean, the everyman can only be so interested in the unattainable for so long, before they want. So they let the hot rods come in and race, which is kind of cool to see in that program.
Oh yeah,
the first event that they let hot rods come in there.
What year was that? Do you remember?
God, it was
51, I think.
Yeah,
it was early.
It was early. Yeah,
that's what's always funny. Yeah, that 1951 always comes up.
There's a lot of that, right?
There's a lot of changing and
and a lot of the
things
first like speed shop catalogs I have are from like 1950. So you'll see all of your early companies, your Thixton, your Hildebrandt, your Eddie Meyer, your all of those were around way back,
right?
And they had their own little shop and their own little catalog, whatever, and they did their thing, and that was great. But 1950 area is when that really started to be a collective, when there was the speed shop, like the Bell Auto Parts and you can get this one catalog. And hey, there's 40 brands in this one book, and you can get them all from us. And that really started becoming a thing as the hot rod thing grew, into more street cars.
And more nationwide too. Then the guy that can't just stop by the local speed shop.
Let's also think of the Amazon of the time, which was Sears and Roebuck, and they had
mail order
catalog right? And I mean, also too, the car version of it, J.C. Whitney, you know, so the catalog thing was already kind of a known way of peddling car parts, but these smaller speed shops, I mean, Alex Exidius, he's quoted for saying that I got rich off of catalogs, right? Because the
he would
catalog,
charge
catalog
per
was a quarter, right? You had to send him a quarter, and you had to send, you know, your postage. So a lot of these guys, yeah, like, you know, they sold other people's stuff, but they made money on catalogs.
Yeah.
And a lot of the, I was gonna say a lot of the catalogs I have too. Your SoCal Speed Shop catalog, you know, there was Honest Charlie in Tennessee that was absolutely enormous. His first catalog was early 50 or late, I think 48 even was the first Honest Charlie catalog to service that area. But a lot of these catalogs I have are the SoCals and the Bell are in the original envelopes from 1950, but they're from New Hampshire, they're from Florida, they're, you know, so
Yeah, not
people
from
people are finding out about this in the back of Hot Rod magazine. Yeah, send me one of those. Like you were saying, it's like they'll pay that quarter for that catalog, maybe never buy anything, but the quarter that guy was making off that catalog, it was.
Well, and that's what's interesting too. You know, you talk like a lot of the early photos we've pulled up from some of the, you know, early custom shops or early speed shops. A lot of them that you're seeing were basically, it was like a gas station in the front with a garage in the back, and probably it said either we do brakes or we do engines or we do body and paint stuff, but then all those guys in the back on the weekends or the nights, they were building their own customs and their own hot rods and stuff like that. And then obviously it expands into that being their primary focus.